Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for High Velocity Radio.
Lee Cantor here, another episode of High Velocity Radio, and this is going to be a good one. Today we have with us Chuck Masek, and he is the author of At War with the Big Dogs. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you.
Before we get too far into things, tell us about the book. What kind of was the genesis of the idea?
Well, the book's a true story. It's actually a true David and Goliath story, how a group of men and women, we called ourselves the Band of Brothers, took an industry that didn't exist and taking devices labeled single-use by the manufacturer and reprocessing them and sending them back to the hospital for half the cost. Obviously, we called them the big dogs. These are multi-billion-dollar corporations that didn't like what we're doing, and they threw everything at us, including the kitchen sink. And the book tells a story of how we overcame the obstacles and ended up being very successful.
So now these single-use devices, that's was controversial at the time, or that's just the way business was done back then?
Well, business was done originally back in before the 70s. Everything was reusable, needles, syringes, etc. But as science progressed, manufacturers started making disposable items. And they started labeling them as single-use. The hospital would use it and throw it away. And some devices, quite frankly, like a needle, are single-use. But they started labeling everything. They labeled stainless steel nuts and bolts as single-use. It got ridiculous. So we decided to reprocess some of these devices and send them back to the hospital for another use. And the hospital saved money. It didn't go into the landfills. And by the way, medical device landfills are more expensive than the normal landfills for medical waste. So we saved the environment, if you will. We lowered costs. And the only people that were upset with us were the manufacturers who lost a lot of money.
So now, is this one of these situations that, like, kind of a manufacturer's like, hey, if we label it single use, then they got to buy more? Or was there some regulation that precipitated this, or some maybe from a legal standpoint, people got sued for something and they were doing this to protect themselves? Like, how did that come about?
Well, the label, how a manufacturer labels his product is up to the manufacturer. The FDA doesn't say anything about that. They can label reusable, they can label single use. Obviously, if it's single use, they're trying to reduce their liability. So if the hospital tried to reuse it, they would not be sued. But as I said, they started labeling everything single use. And it got so they were labeling stainless steel nuts and carbon fiber rods as single use. And we recognize there may be a business here in reprocessing certain ones, but it's up to the manufacturer to label his product. That's his choice.
And then, but there must have been some code or something to get paid for it each time.
Yes and no. The hospital payment system changed over the years. And in 1980, they passed what's called the diagnostic related groupings, the DRGs, where the government told the hospital, we're going to pay you so much per procedure. It's up to you to cover your costs and be better stewards of the money. So the hospital pays the manufacturer for the product, but they bill the government for the surgery or the patient care or bill the insurance company. So what we're trying to do is to save hospitals the cost of doing the surgery. In fact, it got so incredibly expensive. The second highest cost in the surgery suite was the single-use devices right next to employees. That's how bad it got. And so the hospital needed a solution to the problem, and we came up with that.
Now, when you came up with your product solution, then obviously those existing manufacturers weren't too thrilled with your solution, I'm sure. And then, so then did your solution just become kind of the accepted practice now, and then it forced the manufacturers to change that single-use strategy?
Yes and no. The industry was codified by the FDA in 2005 under a thing called the MDUFA. It's the manufacturer's medical device single-use bill. And so we became codified that we were allowed to do this, and we became an industry. Around Europe, they reprocess single-use devices. Some countries do, some countries don't. In America, we are allowed to do that. And so some manufacturers started buying these companies like ourselves to get into the business. It's much like the drug companies fought tooth and nail against the generic drug companies. And now all major drug companies own a generic drug company. Same principle here. Now, some manufacturers are getting smart, and they're actually producing products to be reused several times, and they're called disposables. So the market's in flux right now, but we definitely created a change agent by doing this business, and it's forced manufacturers to sometimes change their strategy.
So now, when you were had the idea and then you were trying to implement it, were you immediately kind of faced by these manufacturers trying to kind of bully you out of the picture? And if so, then how did you get your foot in the door?
Well, at first, remember, these devices were labeled reusable, and what they did overnight is change the label. So there's a thing called an EP catheter. It's used in the heart to map the heart to find out where the problem is. And they go for about $500 to $1,000, and they were labeled reusable. And literally overnight, they started labeling single use. We even got a letter from the manufacturer to the hospital saying, "Don't worry about it; it's the same product." So hospitals started reprocessing EP catheters. So when we started doing it, the manufacturers weren't that concerned because they were used to someone reprocessing it. It's when we stepped out of that zone and started reprocessing GI biopsy forceps and sequential compressing devices and needles, scissors, etc. That's when we got their attention. And so it took about 3 or 4 years to wake up. And when they woke up, they woke up with a vengeance.
Now, did they wake up and try to kind of legislate you out of business, or did they just, how did they attack you?
Well, several fronts. First, they went state by state to try to pass laws against us, and we defeated them in every state, California, Florida, Illinois. Then they went to the federal government, and we fought them there, and finally the federal government, in 2005, finally codified us into law. They went to hospitals. They did everything they could possibly do to stop us from doing what we're doing. Their first strategy was to tell the nurses and the doctors to come to our plant and see what we're doing, because they thought we had a garden hose rinsing these things off in the backyard. So when the nurses came, they said, "Wow, this really is doing well." They saw an organized company following all the protocols. So even though it costs us a lot of money, that tactic worked against them, because when they went back to their hospitals, they reported, "Hey, this is okay. These guys know what they're doing," because everything we did was based on science. See, we could not win the emotional argument. If you said, "Are you going to use that on your grandmother?" We can't win that argument, but we can win the science. And the science is about everything in the world is ultimately disposable, right? I mean, houses need to be painted, iron rusts, cars get old. So the question is, how many times can it be reused? That's the question. And we show through scientific method how we can clean it, test it, sterilize it, and package it, and get it ready for another use.
So now there had to be kind of a few kind of early adopter hospitals or medical systems that kind of went along with your hypothesis, right? That it can be reused, sure, and everything's fine and safe. And
right.
And when you implemented there, did you have to create kind of a different way for them to do what they do, or did you just set up kind of recycle bins and they just put the reusable stuff in a pile and then one of your guys picked it up and then you just kind of sanitized it again?
Yeah, what we do is we put a container in the OR, a biomedical waste container. They put the device in the container. We ship the container back with UPS in this case. We take it to our plant, we sort it, we process it, clean it, sterilize it, and then we send it back to the hospital, and we bill them for the service.
And then by doing that saves them a fortune, because they don't have to buy this, quote unquote, new single-use product anymore. They just put it back on the shelf where the rest of them are.
Exactly. It was a lot of money. Some of these devices were sold for $2,000 and $3,000. You imagine we charge the hospital 40% of the original cost, or 50%, so they're paying half the cost or less. It was a big number.
Right, so that got their attention pretty quickly, I would imagine.
Oh, it did. It sure enough did.
And then was it one of those things where once one system were successfully using it without any problems, then they're kind of telling their friends and it grew pretty rapidly?
Yes, what we did was we went to the single hospitals and got them to use the product, and then we go up the ladder to the hospital group, and these are called IDNs, Integrated Delivery System Networks, and then we had a contract with the IDN, and then all the hospitals could use it under contract. So we start small, prove the model in these hospitals where we had our friends, and then eventually raise up the level of the IDNs.
Now, you mentioned this band of brothers. How did that kind of group, or how were you able to kind of get that group to take this us against them, the David versus Goliath kind of message into the team and to get them all on board?
Well, that's a really great question. And I'll tell you something. The people, the men and women that served with me in this war, and it was a war, some people couldn't take the pressure because it was a crucible. And over time, we lost people. Not a lot, but some people said, I just got to go do something else. But for the people who stayed with me, we really were the rebels. I mean, we really were, David facing Goliath. But it takes a certain kind of personality to withstand that pressure. And fortunately, the people I surrounded myself with who came to us, they either got the vision or they didn't get the vision. And that's true in all walks of life. You either catch it when you get it or you don't get it. And the people that stayed with me got the vision, and they pushed forward to the end.
Now, you mentioned you're a serial entrepreneur, and you've been in this space of creating something from nothing. You've done this. This wasn't your first rodeo. Now, how do you kind of hire and recruit for that quality?
That's another good question. It's interesting. People say, "Well, how can I become an entrepreneur?" And I say to them, well, first things first, the most important thing a young person can do in their life is to find out what their talent is. What are they good at? And they'll say, well, how do you do that? I say, well, it's very easy. You ask enough people. It says in the counsel of many is wisdom. Well, ask enough people. Ask your mother, your father, your siblings. Ask your pastor. Ask your teachers. Ask your co-workers. Ask them, what am I good at? And they'll tell you, because someone who has a talent doesn't recognize it because it comes so naturally to them. Once you find out what you're good at, then pursue that. And it may not be being an entrepreneur. It may be being a nurse like my daughter, maybe being a radio host. So find out what you're good at and pursue that. That way you won't go to work every day. You'll go to a place called Joy and you'll have a lot of fun. And so when people come to me, I try to find out what they're good at. And you ask enough questions, you'll find out what they're good at, and then put them in the right spot to do the job. Because that's when the person will thrive, when they're in the right spot where their talent is best used.
So do you find that that's a place for a lot of discontent for folks, is that they're mismatched and then they're just trying to make it fit and make it work, and they're kind of dreading work every day and they're not giving the best them?
Absolutely. And when I was in college, I read a thing by Henry David Thoreau, and it affected me dramatically. He said, and I quote, "Most men live lives of quiet desperation." When I read that, it actually made me mad. I said, I will never do that. Life is too short. I'm going to chase my dream either way. And I tell people, don't be afraid. Fear is a great inhibitor. Don't be afraid. Press on. Move forward. Always move forward. And when you find those people, they're the successful ones. In fact, I'm thinking about writing another book called The Sparkle Factor. What makes someone successful? What are the qualities to make them not an entrepreneur but successful? And one of those qualities is you always press on against all odds. You do not listen to anybody. You move forward and keep going forward. And when you find those people, they're the ones that build companies and make the company successful.
Now, how do you kind of discern who is that resilient person and who is that stubborn person?
When I interview people, there's certain laws. You can't ask certain questions, right? You can't ask about their marriage or their religion. I don't ask any question. I ask one question in the interview. You know what that question is?
What?
I say, tell me the 3 most important things in your life. Now, if they don't mention God or their job or their family in some form, I don't hire them. Because I want to know the person that's working with me has someone above them in authority. I want to know they're a family person, and I want to know they like what they do. So during that interview, if they don't talk about those things, I just check them off the list. But most people do talk about what they love. And so when finding these people, and look, you have to go through some people, and some people can fool you. There's no doubt about it. But in a culture, when you create a culture in a corporation, whatever that culture is, when someone comes in from the outside and they don't fit, they know it. They know they don't fit. And so what happens is they eventually leave themselves because they understand they're not a good fit. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes shorter, but eventually it comes to where they know they don't fit.
Now you mentioned it, and you use the phrase "band of brothers" that connotates some sort of in a war, and you've mentioned war as a metaphor for what you all were going through. How critical was having that team for you? If you had kind of maybe stumbled upon this solution early on before you had that band of brothers with you, do do you think you would have had the same result if you were like an underfunded kind of entrepreneur with an idea rather than the team that you had around you at the time that you came up with this?
Well, remember, and again, it's in the book here. My wife and I started the company in 600 square feet, herself, myself, and we slowly brought people on. And people, when they come and talk to me about what I was doing, they say, "You're crazy. That's crazy," and they'd leave. People come and say, "Man, that's a great idea." And what happens? You draw these people to yourself. We had no money. By the way, I made an investment in Haiti to make surgical towels, and I lost about $2 million in that deal with a partner who wasn't unethical. He was just stupid, but the results are the same. So what happened was, when I was 40 years old, I was $250,000 in debt with children between the ages of 7 and 13 and about to lose a house. And I'll tell you something, Lee, that's not fun. And from those humble beginnings, I started this company basically in my garage, and then we moved to a 600 square foot building and grew from there. So everybody came on at a time. And so it happened over a period of about 17 years.
So 17 years to be the overnight success that you are?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
So now what is your kind of, if you look in a crystal ball, how do you think this healthcare industry is it going to right itself? Is there a way out of the mess that we're in?
You know, we have the best healthcare system in the world. That's why people come here to have surgeries in healthcare. We obviously have our challenges like everybody does, but I think we have a good system. We have great doctors and great nurses. We have great administrators. And I think over time, it will sort itself out. It always does. And I would not go anywhere else to have my healthcare, I'll tell you that. And we're doing a great job with medical devices and pharmacology. So I'm a big believer and a big proponent of our healthcare system.
So, so a big believer in the innovation and entrepreneurial side of the healthcare system, or the bureaucracy and the way it's delivered side?
Both. I mean, obviously, the entrepreneurial side brings new products. I have 5 new products coming to market this year, and they're all cost less, and the patient does significantly better with my products. That's my 2 goals when I bring products to market: lower cost and better outcomes. So from our side, as medical devices and pharmacology, we can make good products. And the hospital administration, they do well too. There's always examples of failed hospitals, but they're far and few between. Most hospitals and most bureaucracies do run well, and they get the job done. Again, I'm a big proponent of our healthcare system.
Now, what about how a lot of folks don't have the healthcare insurance, or is that do you see that as 2 different kind of things? One is an industry and one is actual healthcare, and one is an insurance issue and a way to get access to more people?
Exactly. The access is a challenging thing for us because obviously we have a limited amount of healthcare people to do the job, you know. So we had to find out what is the best way to distribute healthcare equally and rightfully to people. And that's a debate that's been going on for a long time, and it will continue to go on. And as a country, we'll figure it out. We always do. It's not always the best system at first, but we figure it out. And right now, even though some people do not have health care, in an emergency situation, we have to take care of them, and we do take care of them. So again, on balance, we've got a great healthcare system.
And then you feel that our system kind of globally is the model for the way healthcare should be delivered?
The answer is yes, but I would qualify that by saying we can always improve it.
And you think we're on a path for that continuous improvement?
I do. I absolutely do.
Now, if for people who are considering reading the book, do you find that the book is kind of a success story about a business, or is there kind of more of a philosophical kind of angle to this about overcoming adversity?
The book, I think, whoever reads the book, I think they will enjoy the book. In the first couple of chapters about my personal life and my wife's personal life, she came from a small farm town in North Dakota, a town of 500 people. I was raised by an ex-Marine combat veteran from the Battle of Okinawa who had PTSD. And all these things played into it. My mother did an incredible job. She always encouraged me. She always said, "You can do that, Chuck. You're smart. You can do that." I'll never forget that. I hear parents say to their child, "You can't do that." And I go, "Well, now he can't do it." We should always encourage. Always encourage. A little bit of encouragement goes so far with your employees, with your family. So the book is all about that. And then it goes into the aspect of what happened to us, how the manufacturers did things illegal, unethical against us. But these are multi-billion-dollar corporations. We can't sue them. We never last in court a day because we had no money. But through the whole book, it shows this thing of providence, how providence led us one step after the other. And I tell people all the time, there's certain things that had to happen that I didn't know had to happen. And if it didn't happen, we'd be out of business. So I know it wasn't me. There's a force there besides me of working things out and making them happen. And time and again, we should have been dead time and again over and over, and yet we survived.
Well, congratulations on all your success. If somebody wants to learn more about what you're up to and get a hold of the book, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can go to masekbooks.com, and there's some links to Amazon and to Barnes & Noble, the big people, if they want to buy the book. We have an audio version with Amazon also and an ebook with Amazon. So masekbooks.com, or go to Amazon and order the book. And they will, your readers will enjoy this book. It's a good read, and I've had a lot of people outside myself saying they thought it was a good book. So it's a good story.
Well, Chuck, thank you so much for sharing your story today. We really appreciate you and the work that you're doing in the healthcare industry, and you're still fighting the fight there as well, right?
Yes, I am.
All right. Well, thank you again for sharing your story. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. This is Lee Cantor. We will see you all next time on High Velocity Radio.